If you don't talk, Amanda, it's just Finn looking at you, wondering why you're holding up a doll.
Do do do,
I'm sorry.
Dr. Hooves. Good morning, everybody. Welcome to Bible Study That Doesn't Suck, this morning with the Dr. Hooves edition. It was my birthday last week, and my sister sent me a fantastic keychain with Dr. Hooves on it, which is rather delightful. I am Pastor Amanda Zenzalo. I serve at Central Lutheran Church in downtown Portland, Oregon, where our services are from 10:15 till when we're done each Sunday morning. And you can learn more about us at www.centralportland.org. Over to San Francisco.
Oh, this is Pastor Megan Rohr, and we have buttons, and they're nice. If you come here, you can have one. Or if you send us a letter, I'll send you one. We like letters from people saying that we're great.
Nice letters.
Yeah, you can find our address at gracesf.com. And we worship every Sunday at 10:30 a.m. starting September 27th. Sunday is at 4 p.m. We're going to start doing Hold an Evening Prayer in the evenings, and it's going to be fun. Trust me, because pastors know that church is fun. This Saturday, we're also having a gardening day. There's info on our website. Finn!
I am Finn. I am a mission developer in Portland, Oregon, doing ministry within the LGBTQIA community and a community called Queering Sacred Spaces. We are meeting next Wednesday, September 23rd, whatever date. Yes, September 23rd, at 7 p.m. At Unicornotopia. And we will also be at the Q Center block party. So come by our booth and see us on the 27th in Pioneer Square in Portland, Oregon.
Ooh.
And you can look at more about Queering Sacred Spaces at queeringsacredspaces.org.
Yeah, do that.
Do that.
So we're going to start today with some of the Old Testament readings, and there's 3 Old Testament readings. Finn, do you have any pre-scripted questions you'd like to ask about that?
Which one do I read?
Okay, so if you've ever gone to a place like textweek.org, sorry, I threw Finn under the bus because Finn had a question. We said we can't answer it until later because everyone will want to know the answer. If you go to textweek.com, it's maybe.com or it's maybe.org. I'm going to put a link down here and then you'll know because you'll just click on it.
Textweek.com.
There's a thing and it's like Pentecost plus like 18b.
17.
And there's propers, and there's like narrative lectionaries. There's all these different kinds of readings that exist. There is a thing called the lectionary, and lectionary is a fancy word for a bunch of old dudes a long time ago came up with a 3-year cycle of readings that they thought would be really great for congregations and for pastors. And in that cycle of readings, there are a few differences between some of the denominations. So some groups use like the Pentecost language. That's typically what the Lutherans use if you're of the Lutheran slant. The one that says propers is from the Episcopal tradition because they have fewer choices about which text they would necessarily read because they have bishops with more power than in the Lutheran Church. And there's oftentimes a different Roman Catholic reading. It's sometimes just cropped slightly differently, for good or for bad, depending upon your theological perspective about how that cropping happens. And then every once in a while there's different Methodist readings. We try as much as possible as people who are a part of the inherited Jesus tradition to do things in a way that is similar enough that if the word Methodist was banned and Methodists stopped existing and they all had to go to Episcopal Church, you would be able to follow along for the most part because you'd have a kind of similar order of service. You'd have a kind of similar way of doing readings. And a lot of the different denominations have agreements where if you're a trained Lutheran pastor, you can serve in a Presbyterian congregation. You can serve in an Episcopal congregation, as I have in the past. And you can even go to Catholic Mass if there's not a Lutheran service around, and you can receive elements from there. We're all trying to come out of this same taught ritual that the 12 disciples shared throughout the world after Jesus departed. There were major differences because they split up, and it's like the phone game. the ways that they pass down doing the Kyrie, or the fancy word for, hey, y'all, come to church. Yay, God's great, is passed down a little bit differently for the folk who went and did their missionary work in Africa, and passed down a little differently from the folk who went and did their missionary work in China, and very differently what happened when people got to cross a great big ocean and their bosses were back in Europe, and they got to start over and try to do pioneer church the way that they wanted to. And so a lot of these changes kind of happen in like a telephone game kind of way. But the idea is that we are all a part of one big, if you've ever been a part of those creeds, and they say, we're one part of one big Christian and apostolic church. That's the idea that Jesus is all of our bosses, even if we'll fight to the death, that it should be both and instead of either or even if we would fight to the death, that everyone is forgiven and you don't have to follow a certain set of rules, right? So even as much as we fight with each other and disagree and yell at each other on talk shows, there is this idea that we yearn to be sisters and brothers who all are a part of this same Jesus narrative. And sometimes we do that well, and sometimes we don't. And Pastor Amanda is here to give you a much better explanation than the weird, generalized Pastor Megan version.
Nope, I'm here to give you the practical kind of conversation. So this is Megan's giving you the background as to why there are multiple different choices, which is great information to have, and how that all kind of works together. And the trick of the piece is, as a parish pastor, you get to choose.
If you're someone who has a theology that doesn't say you listen to what your bishop says, then right, you get to choose.
So in the ELCA, as pastors, we get to choose which line we do. So there's, especially in the summer, there's two kind of big things that go along. There's the semi-continuous lectionary, there's the regular lectionary, and then we have the narrative lectionary. And I'm going to give you a preview of something coming from my doctoral cohort down the road. So the narrative lectionary, Pastor John Stevens from Oregon City, who is backpacking this week, and he will be coming back. He is missing everyone, says hello. He had his kids over the summer, so couldn't join us at this time of the morning over the summer, so he will be back.
This is for him.
John.
Oh, you can't see it. This is a turtle and his head wiggles. There you go, John.
So John preaches from the narrative lectionary, and what that does is it takes and tries to tell kind of a storyline instead of taking bits and little pieces from all over the Bible throughout the year. It reads through kind of the storyline for some time. So that's the narrative lectionary. So you can choose as a congregation that if you would like, as a worship committee or as a pastor with your sole discretion, you can choose how you want to decide upon that, to preach from, we're going to do storyline this year more so than the lectionary that everyone else is using. So that's the narrative lectionary. Then when you have the regular lectionary, which are these this 3-year cycle of 4 readings, including a psalm, an Old Testament, a psalm, a letter or a book of Acts, and then a gospel, that's our regular lectionary. There's usually no specific continuity from week to week. There's no, all we have is this is the Gospel of Mark year, this is the Gospel of Luke year, this is the Gospel of Matthew year, and John gets spattered throughout.
Because it's weird.
So, because it's different. And so those are the 4, right, those are the 4 readings, they kind of go along. I tend to defer to that lectionary personally, because it keeps me on my toes and it keeps me not predicting what's going to happen next week. And I have not historically been a series preacher, partially because I find
what's a series preacher?
So a series preacher is someone who takes, like, I'm going to preach on a series for the next.
They pick a theme, like this month's theme is the end times. That sounds cool. And then for 5 weeks they preach on the end times.
And they preach a sermon series.
Yeah.
And sermon series can be great because you can build on it over time and you can do some great stuff with it. But
and at the end you can have a really cool justice project or not.
right?
Raise money for your pews, depending upon what the theme is.
Or you can have a call to action. You can be building an artwork piece across the weeks. You can, right? So you can do some awesome things by having a whole series of sermons that build on one another intentionally.
Yeah.
I personally have not done that in the past because the one time that I wrote my sermon ahead of time was in my first year of ministry, and I was like all excited. I had written my sermon by like Wednesday. I had done the planning ahead. All of these things happened, and then that week was Hurricane Katrina.
That's right.
And everything that I had written had to be thrown out the door anyway, because you can't have that major of an event happen in the world and not address it from the pulpit. That's my feeling.
Don't write sermons.
So my preparation is usually much closer to the end of the week, based quite a bit upon what has happened during that week, either within my congregation or within the world. And so planning a series would be really hard, because then if there's a major world event, people would be expecting me to preach on, and this is what we think about the 18 wives of so-and-so.
Oh my goodness.
Instead of, this event just happened. So
yeah.
But so I tend, as a preacher, my choice is to lean into the lectionary that has feels a little random.
Yeah.
The other side of the lectionary, the semi-continuous over the summer, gives you the opportunity to really sit in the second reading through something that happens kind of semi-continuously. So you don't read every single word of that particular book, but you read through the whole thing. So right now, the semi-continuous reading is coming out of the book of James.
Oh.
And, that's semi-continuous, right? I mean, I don't know if that's exactly alternate first reading and Psalm. Yeah. Well, the second reading is James, so it's not the semi-continuous. The semi-continuous would probably be if you look on the Vanderbilt site, and I'm gonna link it. I'm gonna put it over here, and it's gonna be linked down here. They give you a really nice. Well, they did not let me put it into the text box. Well, bummer.
That's okay. I'll look it up. But what you should know is there's a couple reasons for picking different readings. One, a pastor could say, I really think this will resonate with the congregation. A pastor could say, oh my dear Lord, I've been a pastor for almost 10 years. This is my third time through the cycle. I'm so sick and tired of preaching this sermon at the same congregation. I have nothing new to say on it. Let's just find new readings. They're still from the Bible. Or the congregation could say, we're sick of this lectionary, and we want to read the other stories, because there's so many beautiful, wonderful, and wackadoodle Bible stories that never are a part of the lectionary that could really inspire a congregation, and maybe they want their pastor to step outside the box and stop preaching the same sermon they preached 3 years ago that they remember still. So there's no right or wrong way to make your choices, unless you're a part of a denomination that has bossy bishops who tell you that there's a right or a wrong way to make that decision. And that's up to you, and that's up to the way that your bishops work with you, and what your congregation wants to listen to each Sunday morning too. But let's actually get to the Bible. How about that?
Okay.
I'm gonna since there are 3 choices for the Old Testament, I'm going to kind of talk a little bit about the first 2, and then we're going to spend some time talking about the Proverbs text. So don't think I'm intentionally cutting anyone off. They know I'm going to do this. So Jeremiah is a really awesome book of the Bible. If you haven't read it before, I'm going to tell you why you should. Now, if you just are looking at these few sentences from Jeremiah 11, you might think that this is one of those books of the Bible where God is the biggest jerky pants in the entire world. What is really going on in the book of Jeremiah is that God is snarky, right? And how cool is that? Did you know that God is funny? I'm going to prove to you that God is funny. So about 2 chapters later, God is trying to tell Jeremiah about how people don't listen to him. And if you've ever been in a crowd and tried to get them to do something rational and they didn't want to, you might know what this is about. Or if you have kids and they don't listen, you might want to use this metaphor on them, although we'll see if it works. I don't know if you could get away with saying this. So I'm just going to read for you, word for word, from a translation of Jeremiah 13. This is what the Lord said to me. Go and buy yourself a linen underpants and put it on. but do not put water in it, or do not put it in water, meaning it's going to chafe you because the fabric's going to be horrible, and you have to wear it all chafy. So I bought underwear as the Lord instructed me and put it on. Then the word of the Lord came to me a second time. Take off the itchy underpants that you bought and are wearing, and go to the Euphrates and hide it in a rocky crevice. So I went and I hid it by the Euphrates, and the Lord said to me, and so a long time later, like I had forgotten about my itchy underpants. And the Lord said to me, go at once to the Euphrates and get that underwear that I commanded you to hide there. So I went to the Euphrates and dug up the underwear and got it from the place where I had hidden it. But it was ruined, of no use to me at all. God ruined my itchy underpants. Ugh! Then the word of the Lord came to me. This is what the Lord says. Just like this, I will ruin the great pride of Judah and Jerusalem, these evil people who refuse to listen to me, who follow the stubbornness of their own hearts and who have followed other gods and serve and worship. They will be like this underwear, of no use at all. Just as underwear clings to one's waist, so I fastened the whole house of Israel and Judah to me. This is the Lord's declaration, so that they might be my people, for my fame, praise, and glory, but they would not obey. We, my friends, are God's itchy underpants, says our snarky, funny God. I don't even need to, like, tell you what that means. I just wanted to read it so that you would have a curiosity for the book of Jeremiah and maybe check it out sometime. You are God's itchy underpants. I actually might make them read that on Sunday, just because right after the text is read at Grace, we say something like, and thus is the love of God, or something like that. It's like some, like, really, and I like pairing texts that are weird and then listening to the person say, the grace of the Lord, because that's fun. Okay, so that's the Jeremiah text. I don't think we need to say anything about that. You're all going to go read it, I'm pretty sure. Wisdom of Solomon, we talked about a lot last week. We talked about female language in the Bible and the ways that it's lifted up throughout the Wisdom of Solomon. This is another reading that is being real about what goes on with a human body, and it's talking frankly about death. Pastor Amanda always loves talking about death, and is kind of the funeral queen. But when Pastor Amanda sometimes has done funerals, she's used the Proverbs text. Now the reason that I'm kind of skipping through the Wisdom of Solomon, again, is because we talked about it last week, but also because it's the complete opposite of the Proverbs reading. So Wisdom of Solomon is like, woohoo, women sister, women power, right? It's feminism, not entirely feministic the whole way through, but it's like, God's a woman, listen to God, yay for women. And then this Proverbs section that we have for today is all about how a woman needs to behave and dress. And if you want to tie into the Jeremiah, it does talk about underpants. Verse 17, she girds herself with strength and makes her arms strong. Whenever you read the word girds in the Bible, it means underpants. That's how you girded your private parts. So she's got underwear of strength, which I think is kind of awesome.
Wonder Woman
like
underwear.
Yes, like Wonder Woman underpants. She has Wonder Woman underpants. Pastor Amanda, what do you think about this Proverbs text?
So I know that this is a text that can bring a lot of consternation and a lot of difficulty, and this is one of those that is going to be a both and kind of thing. That it is both a beautiful text in some contexts, and it can be a significant challenge in other contexts, right? So it can be used to lift up, or it can be used to bear down. And that's the challenge of that's the challenge of this kind of writing. What I have found this text really beautiful for are for matriarchal women of the generations who are in their 80s and 90s, these women who lived through the Great Depression, these women who managed to feed their families and make it through some situations that we could never even comprehend. When you have a woman who grew up in a generation where she is, in her teens and 20s, during the Great Depression, maybe she loses her husband and she's had 4 or 5 children. Keep in mind the fact that this is not, 7 children Finn is lifting up. I mean, these are women who didn't have access to the kind of birth control options that we have now. These are women who did not have the ability to attend school or get a job as obviously as we can now. It may not be easy for us now, but it was really, really difficult for these women who are in their 80s, 90s, and 100s that I'm doing funerals for now, right? So we have these women, and then you get to hear their stories where they not only managed to continue to feed their kids, but they got their education and they became the teacher in the one-room schoolhouse and in the plains of the Midwest, and they fed their kids and they kept them warm through the winters, and then they, maybe they met another person and they got married again and they had more children, or they took in more children, because there are a lot of widows and widowers that found their way through these things. So there's that generation of women for whom this explanation of, a capable wife who can find she's more precious than jewels, and she takes care of those that she loves, and she girds herself with strength and makes her arms strong, and she puts her hands to the distaff and her hands hold the spindle. Like, this woman is literally making the food happen and making the clothing that her family is going to wear, right? I mean, just the incredible power of this woman who creates and maintains and fights for. I mean, that's an amazing person. And I have used this several times when this kind of a storied woman dies. This passage, parts of it, I don't read the whole thing that we have here this week, but when you have a woman of this kind of faith and this kind of incredibleness, when you say strength and dignity are her clothing, and she laughs at the time to come. I mean, you can just imagine some of these incredibly strong women, and I think not just of that generation, but of the generation of women of the greatest generation, we call them, who left the East Coast and came out here to Portland to work in the dockyards in World War II. And there was one that I buried this year who, she was just this little pistol. Like, she was this tiny, tiny little thing. And she worked on the dockyards. She was one of the riveters. And, she was one of the ones that was tiny enough that on the dockyards, she would go in between the boats. And she would be doing the rivets on the bottom in between the boats. And then, she told me a story of how, and she's in her teens, right? This tiny little thing in her teens, thousands of miles away from home, with no internet to be able to, text home and be like, hey, I'm having a hard day. But just, on the dockyards by herself. And this huge piece that was held up by a crane, this huge thing of sheet metal, the crane busted, and the sheet metal, slammed down in between the boats. And she, barely got out of the way from being crushed by these things. And this is the kind, she's just this little spitfire of this awesome woman with this amazing faith that when it came time for her death, she didn't laugh at the time to come. She didn't laugh at death, but was, so at peace with it. And these, this verses 28 and 29, her children rise up and call her happy, her husband too, and he praises her. Many women have done excellently, but you surpass them all. And the adoration that her husband, even today, still has for her. I mean, every day in every way when I speak and when I visit him, every time he talks about how it's just no fun without her anymore, because she was truly excellent. And she surpassed all women in her partner's eyes, right? So there is some real amazing beauty to be found in this passage when we're talking about that kind of a life. Now, if you're using it and you're talking to your, daughter who is having difficulty listening to any words that you say, and you're using this not as a reflection of their life, but as a prescription for their life, that's where we're going to hit some really awful, not helpful kind of use of this passage.
Right. And some of that historical reading, like if everyone read this text the way Pastor Amanda did, we'd be like, woohoo! Right? But there have been some real historical points where people like Martin Luther used to say some snarky things to his wife, and then she'd take his food away as a way to exert her power over him. But my hope is that when the next draft of the Gender and Violence Social Statement for the ELCA comes out, that there'll be a sentence in it. I hope it makes it all the way through the Office of Bishops, so that when we get to read it, that sentence that says that we denounce the times, it doesn't say it this way, but it implies that we denounce the ways that Martin Luther was a jerk, particularly when he was talking about the roles of women in marriages. That is something that the Lutheran Church is not inspiring to bring forward. If you're a housewife and you love it, that's fantastic. We're not talking about being against all housewives. We're just for the choice of, for the choice of all women to be a part of making their own decisions about how they are going to live and work. And if you are looking for a way, if you can only see this text as a part of that tradition of telling women they need to be housewives and they should shush up in church, if you're looking for a way to take back this text, I invite you to look. I don't have numbers on the whole thing, which is very unhelpful. Let me make sure this is from the Proverbs. It's not even from the Proverbs text. If you're looking for a way to like counter the Proverbs text, you can balance it with the Wisdom of Solomon. And towards the end of the Wisdom of Solomon reading, there's a section that talks about women lying in wait for the righteous man, because he is going to come and be just. He will profess to be the child of God, and he will have a knowledge of God. And so it's an illusion. It's the story that the woman of the well is a part of, right? The woman at the well is the one who is waiting for this holy person of Israel to come and bring living water to everyone. And it rewrites this story, right? Because this idea from Proverbs that the best kind of woman to be, or the most faithful kind of woman to be, is the one who is a good housewife, is expanded upon with the woman at the well, because the woman at the well has none of the things that would be praised in the Proverbs text, because she's had 7 husbands and isn't married to the guy she's living with, but she still gets the right answer at the end and gets to be included in this idea of what a virtuous, strong woman is, despite kind of the wily way that she was living in the world. The way that you can find that in the Proverbs text, if you're looking for something that kind of brings out the spunk, is there is the line in verse 22 talking about her clothing is of fine linen and purple. While this is an allusion to her being rich, meaning that she could afford the very rare purple dye that came from snails that lived deep in the ocean, right? So this is an allusion to her being rich, but it's an opportunity for you to read that amazing poem, When I Am Old, I Will Wear Purple. And it's this great, spunky poem. My mom's had it in her bathroom forever, about how women are going to dance to their own tune, and they're going to be just as zany as they want to, because, by golly, they're amazing and they can do it. And so if you're looking for ways to kind of bring out the spunk in the text to make sure that people are reading it in kind of a Pastor Amanda fashion rather than in a Martin Luther jerky fashion, that's a couple of the ways that you can do it. Finn, did you have anything you wanted to add on these, or do you want to go on to the James?
No, I'd like to add a different perspective here. So a different perspective is, so this, taking this in context, this time of history, it's a very patriarchal, very, husband-wife, oftentimes many wives type of environment. So what I would challenge to do is take it out of that context and take it into a more modern context based on your context, and think about what is a partnership. Right. And I like looking at this text as to how do partners how do families serve one another? Because really that's what this is about. This is about service to somebody that you love, whether it is your spouse, your partner, your significant other, or if it's to your children and your children to you. I think if you take it out of the context of this is a woman's role,
Right.
or this is the wife's role, and you put it into a context of this is the role of a loving relationship. And so
Right.
this is how ideally I would treat my partner, how my partner would ideally treat me. And you can substitute the words in there really easily and take it out of that binary, this is what women do, this is what men do, and talk about this is a loving relationship.
And it's also a really great week for anyone who likes to have like a homework that they can work on during the week to like enhance their love of God. This is a great week to write a love letter to your partner or to your imagined partner about what you love about them. And I imagine if there was a congregation, you might read this text out loud, but you could post all of the letters that different members of your congregation have about why they appreciate their spouse or their imagined spouse, and you could put them all up on the wall, and it could celebrate the diversity of your community and all the people you want to lift up, rather than just saying this is the one and only way to live. Because this text isn't bad if it's paired with the whole Bible, which has lots of different ways to love and lots of different ways to be in a relationship and lots of different ways to screw up. Probably has more of that than anything else. And so if we use this as an opportunity to write a love letter or even just a list of the top 25 things we love about our partner and post it on the fridge, that's not going to hurt any of our relationships. I don't know a single relationship that's going to be hurt because you write a list of 25 things you appreciate about your spouse. So this could, if you're looking for homework, it's a great thing to do.
I would also lift up that it's a way of being in community as well, because it's not just about that one-to-one relationship. Relationships involve multiple people. It's never just one-to-one. And so I would also include in that homework assignment the reality that you are in community and how that community works in that relationship as well.
Yeah, and this week I just wrote a thank you letter for a teacher that I had in high school because I was really appreciative. So your letter doesn't have to be just to a partner. It could be the top 20 things you love about your pastor. It could be the top 20 things you love about your door person, right? It could be the top 20 things that you love about the grocer clerk. Like, and as long as they know you're not being a weird, like, I'm in love with you person, right? And it's just really about expressing your appreciation for people who normally don't get appreciation expressed to them. How great would that be? Because this starts as a text just saying, here's an example of a really great person. Let me tell you about them. And the same way that Pastor Amanda talked about the Riveter who passed away, like we have stories about so many people that we have loved. You know, if you're a creative writer, this could be a time to write about someone in history or someone in your own life that inspired and mentored you. Part of what happens every Sunday during communion is there's a phrase that your pastor might say, something like, this is a time when we invite all of the angels and archangels from all times and places to gather with us in this space. At Grace, I like to add, and the mentors and the teachers and the loved ones who have inspired us. But this is a good time to even just think throughout the week about the people that you appreciate. And then during communion, you can imagine them surrounding that communion table and welcoming you or sharing God's love with you or inspiring you. Or imagine, even take it a step further. Have an imagination of the people you respect respecting you back, right? Martin Luther King Jr. writes you a letter in your imagination that says, good job for passing on my legacy, and receive the affirmation of people who have inspired you. Homework. Everyone loves homework. What?
Yeah. I think my favorite part of the verse is right in the middle, where it says, she opens her hand to the poor and reaches out her hands to the needy. She is not afraid for her household when it snows, for all her household are clothed in crimson. And I love that because it shows that love that pours out when there's love pouring in.
Mm-hmm. Love it. All right, we have to move along to James now, just so we can get through some more of these texts, but if you like them, go read them some more. Yay, the Bible. All right, James is very crabby this week. And if you have had a grumpy neighbor who is a jerk, this might be a helpful thing for you to read. Not that our congregation has a grumpy neighbor who's a jerk, because, man, we're supposed to be loving our neighbor, and that would be very unpastorly-like for me to not like our neighbor. But this James text is a good one because it's very mad. There you go. That's all I have to say about it.
This is a continuation. The James text, we've been reading through the book of James these last several weeks in our lectionary cycle. And for those who haven't been kind of following along in the previous weeks, just a quick note that James was most likely, the James that we're talking about here was known as James the Just, who is the little brother of Jesus. So Jesus wasn't Mary's only child. Mary had other children, and James was one of those other children. James was not a disciple of Jesus. He was not an apostle. James, like Paul, saw a post-resurrection Jesus, and you can read about that in the book of Acts. And he came to believe after Jesus died and was resurrected. And so the little brother of Jesus comes along and ends up becoming kind of even more so than Peter, more so than Peter, becomes the pillar of the Church of Jerusalem and the followers of the way in Jerusalem. And so James was a huge figure. There's actually historical evidence of James' existence in early Jerusalem at the time of Christ and the leadership that he did. So this is a letter that scholars have determined could most likely be written by James the Just, Jesus' little brother. And
Martin Luther thinks it's a really dumb letter because it didn't agree with him, so he said it was made of straw and should not exist in the Bible.
It's a really tough letter for Lutherans because we are all about grace. We're all about that grace, no works. Anyway, I don't know, do we have the rights for that?
I think so. I like James because I'm a doer. I like to get stuff done. I think it's stupid that we don't make justice happen. So I like James because James also thinks it's stupid if you don't make stuff happen.
James is about living the faith, not just talking about the faith. And so I think Megan said last week, perhaps, that if you kind of have the grace thing down, you're owning that, you're living that, you're holding that in your heart, and you're doing a pretty good job with that. That moving on to James, where it says, get moving.
Grace 2.2.
Grace 2.2. Move it forward. Grace is not there just so that you can sit and be excited. Grace is there not so that you have to go and serve other people, but that you get to go and serve other people. Yeah. And so that's what James is kind of trying to get people to do. And some of the words can get really, really moralistic, and you kids had better not say mean things to each other.
Get off my yard!
Bad. Right? So, but there's strong words here to churches who are wanting to live the faith with authenticity and integrity, who are making mistakes and are trying to get it right. James is good for communities doing it.
Can I also say, Annabelle, I'm glad you're feeling a little bit better.
She's kind of just sitting here a little poofy. She's still kind of not a happy girl. So this is my Annabelle. And
pray for Annabelle.
She's a little bit sick, and she's beautiful and wonderful, and I love and adore her, and she's been with me for many, many years. And she's a little bit sick. She's on antibiotics and antifungals and all those kinds of things. So I appreciate the prayers for Miss Annabelle, who is hopefully going to get better soon.
Yeah.
But she's spending a little bit of mama time with me, and then I'm going to be mean and give her antibiotics as soon as we're done. I know. I'm an evil mama.
Tough love with antibiotics and antifungals.
So this James text, drawing us back, sorry. Hi, Annabelle. I'll see you later.
Yep.
This text reminds me of the Ten Commandments.
Huh.
It is the do not commit murder, do not covet, do not disrespect one another, and it talks about, to me, it talks about the Ten Commandments. It's like the New Testament version of the Ten Commandments. It says, those conflicts and disputes among you, where do they come from? Do they not come from your cravings that are at war within you? You want something and you do not have it, so you commit murder. And you covet something and cannot obtain it, so you engage in disputes and conflicts. So this is almost like that Ten Commandments. So when you don't obey the Ten Commandments, or you don't, align yourself with Ten Commandments, these are the things that you might find yourself doing in your life when you're not in that. I have some inner feelings about the resist the devil and he will flee from you text in there. So I draw back a little bit on that instead of drawing near, which it tells me I'm supposed to do. I don't know.
I'm going to wash my hands because that's what sinners are supposed to wash their hands. So I'm going to wash my hands.
Okay.
Sinners, wash your hands.
So it is that like Ten Commandments, New Testament style, in my opinion, in that right in here. And James is a very self-righteous dude.
Well, one of the things that I wanted to point out from verse 6 about humility, this is one of the texts that I think, at least in the Midwest, where the center of Lutheran factories are, and then we ship Lutherans out unless you came from Pennsylvania and then you got shipped out from there. This idea that you should be humble above all things because God's going to love you the best if you're humble has sometimes been used to be passive-aggressive, or has been used to avoid evangelizing, or has been used to be really mean to people who do good things in the world, and if you get an award, then you're a jerk. And I really think, as someone who's gotten awards before, that's mean. It's mean to be mean to people because they get awards. So humility is not an excuse to be a jerk. That's what I want to say about that. And I don't think that's what humility is. I think that's just being passive jerkiness. The end.
The end. Should we talk about Mark?
Mark!
We like Mark around here.
You have to run.
All right.
All right.
Mark.
Good to see you, Finn.
Thanks. See you later.
So, these are some texts. Strangely, so the weird thing that happens in our church readings is there's kind of these arcs, and the arcs of the readings kind of start with like Jesus teaching tough messages, and then they kind of go towards everyone hates Jesus and wants to kill him, and that happens kind of before seasons change usually. Some of the texts that we're reading feel like it's supposed to be Lent soon, like, because they're talking about Jesus heading towards the cross, but the season that's coming next is Jesus is going to be born into the world, so it can feel a little wonky to have some of these texts like this one about he's teaching with the disciples and all of this business. So just know that if you're feeling a little discordant in your church seasons and you're like, what, isn't it going to be baby Jesus time? Why are we reading all these texts about Jesus dying again? I don't know. I have a feeling it probably has something to do with the fact that Halloween is coming, and so we kind of like being morose these times of the year. I don't know. I just made that up. All Saints Sunday being something that will be coming in a couple of weeks, maybe the more ancient than Halloween service that's happening. One of the things, so if we're thinking about geographically where Jesus is in Capernaum. And when it says that he's in a house, when they're asking him questions, that means Simon Peter's mother's house, which is basically, it's in Capernaum, Simon Peter's mom's house, or at least the place where the big church of Simon Peter's mom's house is a block away. It's like one house away from the temple where Jesus was thought to be the rabbi, right? So it's probably the equivalent in city blocks. It's like the size of the church away. It's the size of Portland's church and Grace's church. It's like maybe 2 house lots away. And so he's hanging out at Simon Peter's mother-in-law's house, who, if you have read the entire Gospel of Mark, is the very first place where Jesus does a miracle. So Jesus is baptized, he flees into the desert and withstands questioning from the devil, and then he goes to Simon Peter's mother's house, she's sick, and Jesus heals her so that she can be a deacon, which is a minister who helps those who are sick. And Simon Peter's mom's house becomes kind of a headquarters. Maybe he lived there. Maybe he hung out there when he was the rabbi of that place, in between sailing around on the Sea of Galilee. But this is a place that is going to remind you that Jesus is a healer and that he's got help healing people, right? So you're going to imagine Simon Peter's mom there, or mother-in-law. You're going to imagine all of Peter's family. It's a tiny, 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 tiny house. So if you've ever seen pictures on the news where families who are first or second generation to the United States have like all 25 people who are a part of their family living in a 3-bedroom house, imagine it like that. Imagine it really full and really tiny, and that they have a great view of the Sea of Galilee. Like, so they're not like so poor. They're not living all together because they're poor. They're living all together because they love their family and they take care of each other. And they've got a great view, and it's really easy for Jesus to slip out and get to the ocean if he wants to sneak off. So in this place where there is a strong matriarch, Simon Peter's mother, whose job is to take care of the poor and to heal them, Jesus is talking to the disciples who have been arguing about who is the best. And he says, whoever wants to be first should be a servant of all. If you think about Jesus only saying this to the 12 disciples, then Jesus is scolding them. He's saying, stop thinking you're amazing and start getting work done, right? It fits along with this idea that James is talking about, get some work done. If you think about Jesus saying this in a room where Simon's mother-in-law is sitting, Jesus is saying, she's taking care of the poor and she's better than you, possibly, right? So Jesus is saying, the people who are taking care of you get it. It's the opposite, sort of what Jesus says when Mary and Martha are in the room to him. Because remember, Martha's like running around doing the dishes, and Mary is sitting at Jesus's feet and washing them and preparing him to go towards the cross and anointing him. And Jesus says to Mary, what you're doing is the right thing to do, to sit at my feet and listen. And the beautiful thing about this is that Jesus, if you look at both of these stories together, Jesus is honoring both ways of being in the world. So in the same way that you have the Wisdom of Solomon text and you have the Proverbs text, one which says being a housewife is really great, and one which says be out there in the world and get stuff done, you have both also in the Mark's gospel talking about the way that women can be. So if Simon Peter is If Simon Peter's mother-in-law is in the room and he says the ones that are serving us, the ones who are bringing us cookies and tea right now, get it more than you do, he's praising the women that are in the space. And the reason that we can think that this probably is what Jesus is up to is that verse 37 is here, right? Whoever welcomes one such as a child in my name welcomes me. Now, who in this society is going to be the one taking care of the kids? Right? Who's going to be the ones who are experts at welcoming children? It seems like we very often dissect these Bible verses, and because we cut and paste them the way that we do in the lectionary text, we forget how they're working together. But I think this is one of the stories that if you imagine who's in the room, changes the way you understand what Jesus is talking about. If you look at paintings about this reading, Jesus is like in the forest somewhere. I don't know why. And little kids are like crawling on his lap and he's welcoming them. You have to imagine it inside the house, which is what it says is happening in verse 33. Inside the house in Capernaum, that's Simon Peter's mother's house. Children are coming to him and he's praising those who are serving them. So this is the equivalent of going to a Shabbat dinner, and if all the fancy people who are supposed to get praise are the men in the room, it's honoring the women who in that meal would be the first to light the candles, the first to do the blessings. And so
comes out of this Jewish hospitality, and it's pretty kick-ass, right? How kick-ass is it that Jesus is like, your mom's cooler than you, even though you've been following me forever. She doesn't need to follow me because she takes care of kids and she gets it, right? I think that's neat. The end.
Yeah.
By the way, I just came up with that. I had no idea that was there. But I like that I went to Capernaum, and now I know that he's at Simon Peter's mother-in-law's house.
You should link the video if you have a video from there. Your
From
Travel
Capernaum.
Faithfully video. Yep.
Yeah.
Link your Travel Faithfully video.
Yeah, I have a video, and you can see where Simon Peter's mother's house. You can also see the temple, and you can see the ocean. So if you want to see what the geography looks like in that space, it's really, really close by. Unless it's also possible, archaeologists don't know it, Jesus might have had his own house where he lived with the wife and his family. If that was the case, it depends on your theology if you think that's possible. If he was, in fact, the rabbi in that community, it would make sense that he had his own house. But even then, if he's inside the house, he's probably talking about the ladies. Because there, too, if he had his own wife and kids, he would be praising them. But yeah, I'll link the videos.
Cool. I think that we have sufficiently covered these texts for this week.
Yay!
Thank you, folks, for joining us, for coming along for the ride, and for learning more about the Bible. It was great to have you with us, and we hope to see you. Well, we won't see you, but we hope that you come and join us again soon. Have a great week.
Yay! Love boldly.